Hello, I'm Michael Opitz, your host, and I want to welcome you to our 6th Internet radio broadcast. Our show today includes my guest host, Christina Jeffrey, Ph.D., Political Science, former House historian, and college professor. Our special guest today is Frosty Woolbridge, and he has been a guest lecturer at Cornell University teaching creative writing workshops, magazine writing at Michigan State University, and has presented environmental science lectures at the University of Colorado, University of Denver, Texas A&M, University of Dayton, and Regis University. He also guest lectures on religion and ethics at Front Range College in Colorado. He's a top radio and TV personality, having interviewed hundreds of stations across the United States, and his websites are www.frostywoolbridge.com, WOOLDRIDGE.com, and howtolivaalifeofadventure.com. Frosty will be speaking today on the immigration crisis that faces America. But before we bring Frosty on, a couple of issues first. Let me also mention that James Strawn is the technical producer for the show, social media consultant, and editor for DecidingTheVote.com, a blog forum for politically active citizens and professionals. And we're all just citizens who are supported by a network of people who share information and stories that provide insight that is not offered by the big media. And this show is about sharing that information with a perspective of accurate facts and truth. We can't start this show, Christina, without a mention of the so-called government shutdown, even though 83% of the federal government is still functioning and all state governments are functioning.
And the ROTC faculty came back to Wofford College today because the DOD said when they realized that they were going to have to pay these people eventually anyway, they ought to get some money out of them. Get some work out of them.
Yeah, and there's already starting to be some backlash. You've got Lockheed here in Marietta, Georgia. And Lockheed manufactures the stealth fighter as well as the C-130s, and that production line is still going strong. But Lockheed's going to have to lay off people, and other suppliers are going to have to be laid off. So we've got another class distinction between the federal government employees and private citizens who have to fend on their own at half the salaries of the federal government employees. But let us not get distracted with that, even though that's very important. I want to mention that, and we don't hear this mentioned in the media, that there are three co-equal branches of federal government, each with different responsibilities. And the founders considered the legislative branch to be most powerful and the most important of all three branches. Matter of fact, the first article of the Constitution deals with the Congress, the House, and the Senate. So if we look at what the Constitution says, the Constitution provides that all spending and taxation begin in the House, and that's Article 1, Section 7. And if I can read that just briefly. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with the amendments as on other bills. So the Senate can only react once the House puts it forward. So the question is, on Obamacare, once it was declared a tax, and of course Nancy Pelosi and the others said it was not a tax, but the Supreme Court ruled that it was a tax. And once it was ruled that it was a tax, Obamacare originated in the Senate. So now there is, I hear rumors that there are going to be court challenges because the taxation legislation did not begin in the House. And Christina, since you were a House historian, I'm sure you have some insightful comments on that.
Well, I don't know. They were insightful the first time that I made them, which was, oh my gosh, they have to put this back through. They have to start over with this legislation because it started in the Senate. I thought it was the most immediately obvious thing about the Roberts decision. If it's a tax, then it was not passed properly for a tax.
But why didn't the Republicans challenge it?
Well,
surely they do.
a wise man that I know who runs something called the Madison Forum said we citizens had better, brush up on our Federalist Papers and memorize big chunks of the Constitution, because our legislators haven't a clue.
They really don't. If they did, then they would be standing up on the floor of in Congress, much like Daniel Webster and our founding fathers did, debating the points of the laws and foundation on the Constitution, instead of just scheduling appointments with the high-powered, moneyed lobbyist who once worked in Congress on that revolving door. I seem to be turning a little cynical here. You'll have to excuse me.
Here's the deal. Madison hoped that we would get a better quality of representative by having a large nation, but our large nation is divided into congressional districts, and no congressional district has any more people than any of the other congressional districts. And our congressmen, it's been shown over and over, are pretty ordinary people. They're not head and shoulders above their constituents. And Tocqueville in the 1830s said there was a lot more virtue, learning, and enlightenment in the ordinary citizen than in the congressman that he met. So the problem is not new.
Well, Christina, you and I both have been longtime activists, and we have both run for Congress. I ran last year in 2012, and you ran the year before that, and you also ran much earlier than that once last year.
That special election
in
'99.
Yeah, and then here in Georgia. So you certainly are stepping outside the comfort zone, and your hat's in the arena, and I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I understand that the gentleman that we're going to talk with in just a little while is also what you might call him a dissident professor. I like that phrase. Mary Graber uses it as her name of her blog, The Dissident Professor. So we're nonconformists. We don't march in lockstep with the rest of the academy, and we acknowledge problems in the system that a lot of our colleagues refuse to even see.
And we appreciate that there are so few conservative professors on campus, and that's by intent. But we'll save that for another radio show at another time. I'd like to turn our attention to immigration, to kind of set the stage for Frosty, because he really is going to provide some insight into the problems that we have with this massive, continuous wave of immigration and how it's changing and will change even more our country. If we look at Article 14, or rather Amendment 14, Section 1, and I'll read from this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Well, people, the bureaucrats in Washington and have pushed this, and the leftists have pushed this to mean everybody who is born in the United States automatically becomes a citizen by virtue of their birth, and I don't know where that ever happens in any other country in the world. It may, but I'm not aware of it. But I'd like.
And it didn't happen in this one before 1983.
That's right. I'd like to go back and share this information with our listeners. Lyman Trumbull of Illinois, and he was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and key drafter of the 14th Amendment. And that when was that? That was 1867, I want to say.
I think you're right. It's before 1870 and after the war.
Yes. And he was a key drafter of the 14th Amendment, and he explained the jurisdiction requirement, because what I just read was, and let me highlight this, that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So remember that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The what Lyman Thrumble said, what that means, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And he said, what did we mean by subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? He said, not owing allegiance to anybody else. That's what it means. In Pennsylvania's Edward Cohen, who also was on that committee, discussed citizenship's limits. Quote, if a traveler comes here from Ethiopia, from Australia, or Great Britain, he has a right to the protection of the laws, but he is not a citizen in the ordinary acceptation of that word. So the accidental traveler who comes here, if they have a child, they are not a citizen of the United States, and that's the way it's been. And there were actually, as Al Gore said regarding the controlling authority or Supreme Court ruling, that case was tried in the Supreme Court in 1881, I believe, and then there was another one in the 1890s. So it is constitution. It's simple constitutional law, but it has been upheld by the Supreme Court. But the federal government has ignored it, and the states do not seem to understand their role under the Constitution and the 9th and 10th Amendments because they can control it. But we'll have to save that discussion for another show. But I'm sure you have a comment.
Well, it's things have changed a great deal, though, Michael. They're not where we think they should be, but they've changed a great deal since the 1970s when I was in graduate school, and professors of constitutional law told us to just ignore the 9th and 10th Amendment, that they were mere truisms without any content and irrelevant to constitutional law. States are beginning to look at those amendments, and they're beginning to get some serious attention from serious people. And, we're probably on the cusp. We could go either way. The states could elect Democrats and liberals, and that would be the nation's way of saying, we don't care about having states. We don't need them. We don't care about them. Or we could be victorious.
Yes, we can. Georgia's Governor Nathan Deal, several years ago while he was a sitting congressman, he and I were attending a meeting, and after the meeting had a discussion. He was looking for a constitutional test case to put before the U.S. Supreme Court on illegal immigration on this very point on birthright citizenship. So I asked
Yes, I remember that.
And I asked him the question. I said, how is it that you or me become a citizen of this country and a citizen of the state? He said, well, I honestly don't know. I said, well, surely between the two of us we can figure that out, knowledgeable, intelligent people. And since you were a state senator in Georgia, there's got to be an answer for that. He said, Michael, I really don't know. I said, well, and I pushed it again with him. I said, let's try to figure this out. And he said, well, no one's ever asked that question before. So we continued the discussion. He said, well, the only way I see that it could be done is by the states. He said the states issue a birth certificate, and that's where it all began. So I said, well, then if the state legislature passed, or perhaps the governor could do this with an executive order, that for foreign citizens who are here and have their babies here, that it could be stamped on their birth certificate as per the 14th Amendment. This birth certificate does not constitute citizenship, a statement or grant citizenship, and an accompanying letter saying, please register your child's birth with your embassy or consulate as soon as possible. And he said, I think that would do it. I tested that with a Georgia senator and a Georgia state legislator, and they agreed on it, but you know what? Everybody was scared to death to introduce it. I called the gentleman in the Arizona Senate, and I can't think of his name right now, and I explained that to his legal assistant, legislative assistant, and by golly, within 2 or 3 weeks, I saw on Fox News that he was planning to introduce the legislation, and unfortunately, he was voted out of office before that could happen. But anyway, he's a
little too original for the constituents.
Yes, the news media got a hold of this and just chopped him to pieces. It is unfortunate because this is a constitutional issue, and we see how much it has changed since you said, since the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think it's time to bring in Frosty. He's going to speak on this issue and can probably shed a lot more light in this discussion. His bio is so large and so detailed.
Renaissance man.
Yeah, oh, indeed he is. And that if I were to read the entire thing, I think we would run out of time. So, but nevertheless, we'll just hit some of the highlights. But everything here is a highlight. So anyway, Frosty possesses a unique view of the world, cultures, and families in that he has bicycled around the globe 100,000 miles on 6 continents 7 times across the United States in the past 35 years. He's written hundreds of articles regularly for 17 national and 2 international magazines. He has had hundreds of guest editorials published in top national newspapers, including Rocky Mountain News, Denver Post, Albany Herald, Las Vegas Tribune, Daily Camera. Even wrote a column, Crystal Desert Continent, for a major newspaper in Colorado while he lived in Antarctica. My goodness. And it just goes on and on and on. Frosty, I don't know that we have the time, but let me mention your books. Handbook for Touring Bicyclists, Strike 3, Take Your Base, Bicycling Around the World, Tire Tracks for Your Imagination, Motorcycle Adventures to Alaska, Teen Novel, An Extreme Encounter, Antarctica, Bicycling, The Continental Divide, Slice of Heaven, Taste of Hell's Immigration, Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences, America on the Brink, The Next Added 100 Million Americans, Losing Your Best Friend, Vacancies of the Heart, Rafting and Rolling Thunder, Journey Through the Grand Canyon, How to Live the Life of Adventure, The Art of Exploring the World. He writes for BeforeIt'sNews.com, TheAmericanDaily.com, HumanEvents.com, FreedomPhoenix.com, TheAmericanChronicle.com, Neighbors, DenverPost.com, NationalWritersSyndicate.com, LibertyNewsline.com, and dozens of more news sites. Frosty, tell me, when do you have to... And by the way, Frosty and I had lunch together with my 2 sons when I was in Denver last year, and I met Frosty over 10 years ago when he was lecturing on immigration here in Atlanta. Frosty, how did you find time to work me into your luncheon schedule?
Well, thank you, Michael and Christina. It's really a pleasure to join you and to join this conversation. And as you can imagine, I'm a person who takes action. I don't watch TV. I don't have time for it. I really work 65 hours a week, usually September through May, and then I take off on adventures. And those adventures actually give me more insight into the human situation, not only here in America, but all over the world. And I have seen sites that most folks only see on the Nature Channel. I've seen sites, and I've seen people, and I've seen cultures in great detail, not just flying in and staying at the Taj Mahal, but actually riding at 12 miles an hour across the entire Asian continent, around the entire of Australia, actually 9 times across the USA, coast to coast and border to border, the entire length of South America. You name it, I've done it, and even ridden a bicycle and camped out in Antarctica. And those experiences, and let me say that I am a graduate of Doherty High School in Albany, Georgia, in 1965. So I'm
in Albany, Georgia.
And you also graduated from Michigan State University. I forgot to mention your academic credentials, but if you could touch on those, that would be helpful to the audience as well.
Well, thank you. Yes, I then traveled to Michigan State University, graduated from Michigan State with a degree in journalism and advertising, and then went on to a postgraduate degree in English literature and with a teaching certificate, and became a math and science teacher. I'm the son of a U.S. Marine, Master Sergeant Howard Wooldridge, 27 years in the United States Marine Corps, and I then took up this journey through math and science teaching, and in the summers was able to travel all over the world. In the meantime, I probably had somewhere around 20 different jobs, which have really put me in touch with all kinds and facets of life, from a pool cleaner to a lifeguard, to a teacher, and even to an 18-wheeler truck driver. So I've really run the gamut with those experiences, and even a ballroom dance teacher. So it's been a fabulous ride. I'm now 66 years old, and what I have seen in the world, and what I see coming to America, I am probably, you could call me a dissident professor or an outlier. Galileo was an outlier. Susan B. Anthony was an outlier. Even Dr. Martin Luther King was an outlier. They put their lives on the line to bring the facts, the figures, and the realities to this civilization in order to better it, to advance it, to promote it toward a more peaceful and hopefully more fair, a fairer future. And right now, with all of my writing, and certainly that last book, America on the Brink, the next ad to 100 million Americans, few Americans understand exactly where we're going, and I'm hoping to be one of those outlier or dissident professor voices that really alerts the American people. And I'm trying to get on 60 Minutes. I'm trying to get on Charlie Rose. I'm trying to get on Matt Lauer and all of the top shows, because we are, as a civilization and as a country and as a culture and as a language, we're in a great deal of trouble if we continue this massive and endless immigration into our country.
I saw one report today. Matter of fact, this started years and years ago when it was reported that over 100 mosques had been built in the United States, and this is while George Bush was president. And I asked the question to one of our congressmen, that if it had been disclosed that the government was funding the building of Christian churches, and once that was discovered, what would happen to those churches? Would they be torn down? Would they be sold? Would there have to be dollars paid to the federal government for the building of those churches? And, of course, that was a rhetorical question, but the real question was, if the United States does not have the ability to fund the building of churches, then how is it that a foreign government, Saudi Arabia, can come in and build 100 mosques? It's now increased to 1,000. And we're bringing in millions of Muslims from the Middle East into this country, and jihad looks like it may be on its way to the United States, and that's in addition to all the illegal border crossings. Frosty, do you have a view of this issue?
Well, I certainly do, and actually the latest figures on mosques built in America since 1991, where we only had 100,000 Muslims in this country, we now have 7 million Muslims, and they're coming in by the hundreds of thousands every year now, and they are manifesting humongous birth rates. And we now have honor killings in this country, which I've reported on. We have female genital mutilation in all states where Muslims abide. We also have multiple wives that are called just family members. We also have, unfortunately, arranged marriages, and even Ann Curry at, I think it was NBC, did a full feature on that. And we have now not just 100 or 1,000 mosques, we have 2,100 mosques and growing. And I think the best way I can sum this up is a short quote by the former James Walsh, who was the Associate General Counsel to the United States Immigration Naturalization Service, which used to be the INS, which is now, of course, ICE. He said, and I quote, "Immigrants devoted to their own cultures and religions are not influenced by the secular politically correct facade that dominates academia, news media, entertainment, education, religious, and political thinking today. They claim the right not to assimilate, and the day is coming when the question will be, how can the United States regulate the defiantly unassimilated cultures, religions, and mores of foreign lands? Such immigrants say their traditions trump the U.S. legal system. Balkanization of the United States has begun. Unquote. I hope everyone listening tonight understands the implications and the ramifications of that quote, because he said that in 1991. And we are now seeing the manifestation of that throughout this country, the enclaving of these different religious sects, Islamic, Sunni, Kurds, and Shiites. And as a matter of fact, if you walk down Market Street in Philadelphia right now, where Ben Franklin used to walk, it is loaded with women wearing black burqas, and you can only see the slits in their eyes as they walk down the street. And of course, I've always said that this kind of treatment of women is just, it makes them into non-beings. There's no lower subjugation of a woman by a man than to completely take her out of view of anyone. And that is the Islamic way. And you'll see it even happening in this country. All of a sudden, a woman comes to this country and she has the freedom to be a woman, a freedom to run for president of the United States, freedom to express herself wearing jeans and or a dress and or whatever. And yet the culture is so powerful and so domineering and so misogynist that it continues in this country with female genital mutilation and certainly arranged marriages and honor killings and so forth. And you have now seen the manifestation of jihad in this country, whether it's the Boston Marathon boys, who were, for all intents and purposes, could have been amazing American boys, instead chose a very dangerous path for all of us. The other immigrant that was the New York Times bomber, the U.S. Army Major Nadal Hassan, who killed 13 and wounded 43, the Fort Dix 6, and we are going to see more and more of this as we import more and more of Islam. One of the great quotes out there was by Churchill, and I think it's an important quote. He said this in 1899, Winston Churchill. Individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of the religion paralyzes the social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world, unquote. That's a powerful statement, and actually I have published a 19-part series on Islam and Muslims in America and in Europe, and for anyone who would like to see that series, you can go to newswithviews.com or beforeitsnews.com, or just email me at my websites, and I'll send you the entire, with pictures, Muslims in America and in Europe, because they never, and I want to make this very clear, they never assimilate into host countries. They simply create enclaves, they maintain their own languages, and they then push, as their numbers grow, to manifest Sharia law, which is probably one of the most barbaric forms of religious law that I have ever seen on the face of the planet. In fact, Thomas Jefferson said very much the same thing.
Well,
Christina,
we really
I want to ask you, Christina, why aren't American women, whether it's the National Organization of Women, but why isn't there a unified voice of American women speaking out against this atrocity for Muslim women, most of whom probably don't want to be in this situation, but they have no choice?
There's no support at the elite levels. Quietly, you have women talking very sensibly and very disapprovingly of Sharia law and of the barbaric customs of Islam, but we don't have any. There's no elite opinion that sets the tone for what makes that kind of conversation acceptable. I mean, if we wanted to survive as a nation, we would be requiring still that everybody swear loyalty to this country before they're allowed to be a permanent resident. And
Well,
everybody else should be on a short visa if they're allowed in at all. I mean, to me, this is another organization, this is another group that advocates the overthrow of the United States Constitution. It doesn't advocate it by force, not publicly, like the Communist Party did, but it advocates it. I mean, the spokesman of American Islam will say when they're pressed that, of course, if they were in the majority, they would want to get rid of the U.S. Constitution. These are not good citizens.
No. Their religion seems to be it's a political force. But and Frosty, perhaps you have an answer for a question I've been wanting to ask someone. I have heard that Japan does not grant visas to Muslims. Is that an urban legend, or is there any truth to that?
That is exactly 100% true, Michael. As a matter of fact, Japan is so fearful of Islam. It does not allow an embassy from any Islamic state, and it does not project any and carry on any Islamic embassies, Japanese embassies in Islamic states. It does not have anything to do with Islam because it knows how dangerous it is. One of the things I'd like to really bring up,
please do.
And Samuel Huntington talked about it in his class of civilization, which I'm reading right now. And one of the things that's fragmenting America right now, and we're so paralyzed, is we've become from pretty much of a very mono-ethnic country back in 1965 when it was 90% European American, about 8% African American, about 2% Hispanic American, if you want to make the numbers. It's now about 56% European American. Hispanics will become the new really force just by birthright and immigration by 2042, and the European Americans will become the minority. And of course, the charge will be blacks will remain similar, and then of course the Arabs or the Arabic people, the Middle Eastern people, will become a major force with over 20 million. We're fracturing our culture, and we're fracturing and creating linguistic chaos. And Huntington said this, and I'm quoting, "It is my hypothesis that the fundamental source of conflict in this new world will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation-states will remain the most powerful actors in the world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations and cultures. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. The fault lines between civilizations will be the new battle lines of the future," unquote. What that means is, from my perspective as a world traveler, having seen cultures in action, and I've seen a lot of cultures, almost 100 countries, is that they're very nice, and they're very kind, and they're very loving, and people around the world are just really quite beautiful. But they always press for dominance. So what we're setting up in this country is a tribal clash of civilizations, the African American clash, the European American clash, the Hispanic or Mexican clash of culture and civilization, and now a growing, and I mean aggressive, Islamic Muslim tribal clash. And as we lose the cohesive language of English in this country, you're going to see more and more misinformation or misunderstanding or misrepresentation of a sentence, if you will. Because people who have different cultures so incompatible with Western thought, such as Islam, there's no way to reason with them. There's no way to talk with them. There's no way to come to terms. And so then you have some kind of physical violence or conflict. And that's going on the last summer in Sweden. Sweden was burning because of the Muslims there are so unhappy. Well, the same thing's happening in Norway. You have two different Londons right now. and that's the British London, and then you have the Muslim London. The same in Paris, France. The same in Belgium. Belgium will probably become a Muslim state inside of the next 20 years. They will have birthright overpowered the host country, and in fact, Holland has stopped importing anyone, and Muslims specifically, because they have proven to be so recalcitrant as any kind of enculturation into Dutch communities, and you've got similar problems in Spain right now. So this phenomenon of mass immigration, and just the little we've just talked about, think of us adding 100 million people from all these very culturally poor countries and educationally poor countries, and the poverty that's intractable will become the new intractable poverty in our own country. And right now we have 47 million Americans subsisting on food stamps, millions upon millions in Section 8 housing, which is like government, and you and I pay for it. That anchor baby feature, in fact, Nathan Deal, when I met him 10 years ago, had introduced in Congress the H.R. 1968, which was to stop birthright citizenship, which was at that time around 350,000 to 400,000 new anchor babies per year, or jackpot babies as they were called. And now the same thing is going on, and Steve King out of Iowa tried to stop it with his H.R. 698, but it keeps getting tabled and put into a silent committee. And yet these births are costing these birthright citizenship children there is actually websites from Asia of mothers coming over here pregnant, birthing their child, and getting that very important citizenship. And what that means is when those kids hit 18, they can come here, and then they can chain migrate endless thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And that's why we're seeing this extraordinary onslaught, swamping of America, of well over 100 million immigrants within the next 30, 35 years.
Frosty, all of these countries, if you look at them individually, from Europe to the United States, they have all enacted policies that is destroying their countries and their culture. Are these countries doing it individually out of ignorance, or is there a larger force behind all of this that encompasses the United States and Europe, driving the existing culture down while replacing it with the Islamic culture?
That's a loaded question, Michael, and I, as a journalist, and I do a lot of homework, folks. I don't just write words. I write understanding from my own experiences, and then I couple it with the facts. And what I'm seeing right now, when I wrote Immigration's Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences, it was based on a speech in Washington, D.C. on October 3rd of 2003 by then, he was governor of Colorado, Dick Lamb. It was a brilliant speech. No one applauded. They were so shocked out of their minds because the 8 ways to destroy America, you could see it back then. Now you're seeing it at full speed. And the question is, are we doing it to ourselves? Are those 535 supposedly American citizens and representatives of America, are they intelligent enough, educated enough to understand what they're doing to their future generations? I mean, with anybody with a mind, with a 3-digit IQ, and you'd hope that everybody in Congress is running with at least a 120 IQ.
Not the guy from Georgia who thinks that if you put too many soldiers on the island of Guam, it'll tip over.
right. Well, and there are exceptions around the clock, but I do think I think something or someone, an entity like a George Soros or the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, and certainly this extraordinary experiment, a constitutional republic, has been the envy of the world, but it is fracturing and fragmenting so fast right now. It's not going to be able to survive many more decades like this, whether it goes broke and or whether it has internal violence between the racial groups and the cultural groups, or it starts to simply disintegrate because we don't have the energy to run it. And so whomever is coming after us to create a one world government, which is one of the prime directives of the United Nations, but unfortunately those things don't work because the United Nations can't even help the world right now. It's really impotent on every level, hasn't done anything in all of its years of existence, and really on the final analysis, it's up to each country to be responsible for its own existence, its own sustainability, and its own viability as a civilization. And you can see where it's failing around the world, places like Pakistan or like Haiti. Now, let's just take Haiti. Haiti right now is a country with probably 90 to 95% illiteracy. And one thing I've learned in my world travels is what defines a failed state, like the Congo or Kenya or Sudan or Ethiopia or any of these countries where all these people are fleeing, and that the word is illiteracy. They can't feed themselves, they can't water themselves, they can't house themselves, they can't even create jobs for themselves. And so they're fleeing into these first world countries of Canada and Australia and America and Europe, and yet what they're doing is bringing these countries down to a lower and lower and lower level, so much so that these countries are not able to function cohesively and as cultures. And if this continues, this power or this particular, Council on Foreign Relations or the UN or whomever is driving this thing, they'll definitely take the United States away from a constitutional republic and make it more of a giant welfare state, a socialistic state, and it will no longer it will cease to be a constitutional republic where the individual has the right to choose and the ability to choose and the ability to work and the ability for personal accountability and personal responsibility.
Frosty, as we see a greater gap between the haves and the have-nots, or the rich and the poor, here in America, what do you think and all of these people know it with the IQ, 3-digit IQs. They know what they're doing. It's not happening by accident, as Franklin Roosevelt said. Nothing in politics ever happens by accident. What do you think their end game is, and why?
There are extremists throughout the world. There's athletic extremists like Michael Phelps, the great swimmer. There's a football like Peterson of the I think it's the Minnesota Vikings. There's great basketball extremists. Well, there's also great financial extremists like Donald Trump or Carlos Slim down there in Mexico with $54 billion. Then you got a Bill Gates. And those are different kinds of extremists. You've got academic extremists that have PhDs hanging all over their name. Well, there's also power extremists. You could even call those who, try to become president of the United States power extremists, and you see dictators all over the world, they're power extremists. I think that what's going on in this country today is that some extremists with a lot of power and a lot of money are throwing elections. They're able to do it, and they have the power to do it, and those extremists want to literally destroy the United States of America. And at this point, they're well on their way. And I see the end game. I'm not sure you'd think they'd want to have a functioning society instead of seeing a collapsing society. And then there's other people out there that seem to think that it's all going to turn out to be a wonderful bouquet. Well, there's no country in the world right now that has all these conflicting ethnic groups and religiously conflicting groups making it a bouquet of humanity. Look at Iraq. It's at each other's throats, the Kurds, the Shias, and the Sunnis. And they've always been at each other's throats. And in fact, when the Christians lived there, they were at the Christians' throats. So that was 4 different groups vying for power and supremacy. If you look into why did Pakistan separate from India? Same reasons, that the Muslims wanted their own state, and they didn't want to be a part of anything like a Hindu or Buddhist or whatever. So what you're seeing is the United States is inculcating or injecting all of this disarray into itself since 1965, thanks to Teddy Kennedy and I think it was Metzenbaum, And then
yes,
he said, Metzenbaum said, let the floodgates have been opened. And since that time, we imported 100 million people, and then that gave birth to the hyphenated American, Pakistani American, Iraqi American, something else, anything but an American. And we lost the cohesive unit of English and the cultural foundation of our country. And there's no question, I doubt that if we don't stop mass immigration into our country and cut it down to less than 100,000 per year, and only those 100,000 are highly compatible, speak English, and have a high education that benefit the country, and that's what I put in my books, then we are going to go the way of the Roman Empire. It's almost inevitable. In fact, it is inevitable that we will go the way of the Roman Empire if we fail to stop mass immigration. Because if you remember in the Roman Empire, the Visigoths, the Goths, and the Vandals came down, and they just completely dissected Rome as it became more fat, it became more drunk, it became more slovenly, and less alertness. Rome fell. It took about 300 years, but I think it's going to accelerate much faster here in the United States. I think we could cease to be a functioning cohesive civilization and country and constitutional republic within the next 3 decades.
You're giving it a lot longer than I would give it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm being very optimistic. It might limp along, but it's going to be a mess, not only for all Americans, but all of these immigrants too, because we are already 7 states that are running out of water, and I can name those if you care me to.
Please do.
Florida, which has 18 million people, is on its way to 36 million people, and it already has water shortages. Georgia, right now with about 8.2 million, is headed for 16.4 million within 37 years. And Georgia already has had water issues with Lake Lanier drying up. And just think, when you double the population but you can't double the water, then Georgia is going to be just a very crowded state with 16.4 million people. Texas is in trouble.
And on Georgia, and for people who do not know, there are no rivers flowing through Georgia from other states. All the rivers flowing in Georgia originate in Georgia.
That's correct. And then you've got Texas, you've got New Mexico, you've got Arizona, you've got Nevada, and then you've got, of course, California, which is on course, ladies and gentlemen. California adds net gain per day 1,655 people, virtually all of it from legal and illegal immigration. And they're going to be well over 20 million more added. They're going to jump from 38 million to 58 million within the next 30 years. And, of course, Mexico doubled its population from 50 to 104 million people in the last century, is now at 114 million, headed for about 140 million, give or take. And those people are starving. They can't get jobs. They have no water. They have no arable land. And they are coming north. So you see, if you really follow me on this and you read my 2 books, when I said Immigration's Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences, I meant deadly consequences. I should probably rewrite a primer to that book, because it's coming so fast. Even I am astounded at the speed of it. And all of us are going to pay a terribly sobering price for what we are bequeathing to future generations.
Christina, do you have a last question or comment for Frosting?
Well, the first quote that you started with from the former INS director in 1991 refers to a political correctness that no longer exists. When we were coming through school, you and I are the same age. It was politically correct to believe in real diversity, ideas as well as peoples, but patriotism. I mean, somebody called another person unpatriotic in a debate. Why, that was fighting words. Now patriotism is kind of déclassé in the academy. Preferring your culture over another is outrageous. The political correctness of the 80s doesn't exist anymore. We no longer are shocked that women are mistreated in other cultures, because multiculturalism says whatever you do in your culture is good and equal to any other culture.
That is a great unfortunate. In fact, let me quote Dr. Otis Graham, a man I know who wrote a fantastic book called Unguarded Gates, and I've met him and spoken with him. He said, and I quote, "Most Western elites continue urging the wealthy West not to stem the migrant tide that adds 80 million net gain annually to the planet, but to absorb our global brothers and sisters until their horrid ordeal has been endured and shared by all. 10 billion humans packed onto an ecologically devastated planet," unquote. Let me just make one other point. If the human population density of Haiti, the island that's just a totally failed state, people are living in utter misery. They don't have toilets, they don't have lavatories, they don't have showers, they don't have jobs, they don't have school, they don't have anything. They're literally living by hand and mouth. They have a density population that if it was comparable to, they have 9 million on this tiny little island. If the same persons per landmass square mile was injected into Minnesota, which is now around 5 million people, would house 79.1 million people. So if you look at those kind of numbers, and then can you imagine 79.1 million Haitians migrating into the United States and hitting our school systems with their intellectual poverty, with their educational poverty, with their cultural poverty? Do you think this country will survive that?
Well, this country never would never have gotten to its level of achievement with people so ignorant and unenlightened. Democracy doesn't work with unenlightened people. Only works with,
Christina.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I know that population crowding is a big concern of yours. I imagine I would agree with you on 90% of. Mm-hmm. But I'm inclined to think that 79 million Minnesotans could make Minnesota work. But I don't think 5 million Haitians could make Minnesota work.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. But do we want that kind of quality of life throughout our country? Do we want to go toward the projected 625 million from the current 316 million and think that we're going to have quality of life, fresh air, clean running rivers, and plenty of land to play, and that the animals have wild wilderness to procreate, and we can all go to Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons, and we can all go to Yosemite and certainly the Grand Canyon at any time. At some point, that's going to be all taken away from us.
But people differ. I think that there will always be that. But I've had students come to Atlanta from Texas and say, I really don't understand what you do here in Atlanta, all these trees, all this green. This should be parking lots.
With that comment, Christina, we're going to have to begin closing the show, and I hate to close it, Frosty. What you have shared
with us
again. Is so vital and so important. We would like to invite you back, and hopefully you will come back. It's a very, very sobering thing. Let me mention your websites again, if I may. Of course, the W's, Frosty Woolbridge, WOOLDRIDGE.com.
That's the serious one.
The serious one.
Yep.
And howtolivaalifeofadventure.com. So you've got a great balance there. I've looking at what I do every day and what you do, I just can't imagine how you're able to cram it all into a 24-hour day. That's the one thing that we all share, the number of hours in a day. But I can't tell you how much we appreciate the work that you do and continue to do, and just thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It comes from love of country, love of our culture, love of God, and love of life. And if I can share that with anyone and everyone, those create the enthusiasm that I have for America and for the world and the people of the world. And this whole thing is going to prove the greatest and most challenging issue of the 21st century, and we must come together to solve it together. And I hope that I'm just one of the people out there that's making a difference, just as you are, and Christina, just as you are. So let's go forward and let's have another time together, and I think it'll be we can really bring it home.
We'll do that.
Thank you so
Hopefully
much.
this show will magnify your words, and as more and more people will hear them and become involved and demand that our representatives in Congress act before we lose our country. But we'll be back next.
Real
ahead.
Quick. Please have everyone listening. You probably are very sobered about this. And what can you do? 3 organizations: www.capsweb.org, capsweb.org, extraordinary. www.numbersusa.org, numbersusa.org, with 1.3 million American citizens care about the future. FAIR, FAIRUS.com, .org. All those 3 organizations will allow you collective power to make a difference and change the course of history toward a positive America and a positive United States. And so please join them. They're for free, and you will become highly effective, become part of the letter faxing crew and even the phone calling crew, and tell all of your friends about those and have them join. We can change the course of history by our actions, not our grumbling, not our complaints, but our knowledge, our enlightenment, and our enthusiasm for the future.
Frosty, thank you again. And we'll be back next week, and we hope that you've found the show to be both interesting and informative. Please tell your friends about the show and where to find us, because if we are to turn our country around, it will take all of us working together. Many thanks to Christina and James Strawn, the technical producer for this show, which is carried on decidingthevote.com. And my email address is mopitz, O-P-I-T-Z, @mindspring.com. Remember, knowledge is power, ignorance is slavery. This is Michael Opitz wishing you a blessed day.